Hi, and thanks for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I'll help you create teams worth leading because life's too short to lead a mediocre team. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, Tech Executive Coach and Consultant, and our subject today is skill stacking. Now, I'm not talking about cloud skills, even though that might be what people picked up. Just as I said the name, I realized, that might be the impression people are going to be getting. But no, I'm talking about skills of you and your team. When you're looking at how teams are supposed to be growing, and this is something that I talk about constantly, I know, because I still believe, even with whatever AI is doing, that the people in your team and having them keep growing is what's going to be your moat. That's what's going to be making the biggest difference between you and whatever other companies you have in the same office building, is the ability to grow your team and make it get better constantly, ensure that people are evolving, maturing, and the seniorification of your people is all in all how we're going to be standing out in this industry. However, sometimes we lack the discipline, the tools, the path on how to get there. If you've checked out my Impact Coaching Framework ebook, which is a short read, like 20 pages and free, you can get a link to it in the show notes. I talk about the importance of setting very specific, tangible goals to help people grow in ways that are material, that they can see themselves making progress. Often it ought to be also connected to the current company's needs, the business needs, not just stuff people want to do just for the heck of it. But when we're talking about these skills, it's important to take a second and think about how are you going to be leading the path. Sometimes I see people jumping way too high. Like we did something very basic and the very next skill that you're trying to add on is something that's way too advanced. And I tell my clients that they have to think about this a bit like building out a good, solid wall. You have to ensure that you've got a good base before you put on and stacking those next skills and go up. You have to have a very solid foundation that will allow someone to become as well-rounded as they want to be. I know that we all seem to be in a huge rush nowadays, and we all don't have time to waste. But when we do it too quickly, we often end up not building the right habits and the right ways of thinking, so that we might feel like we're making progress, but it's all extremely shallow. We do not have enough understanding of what's happening. We haven't had enough experience with whatever we're doing. So these are, it's like the shallowest way of coaching. We were ticking boxes without having actually made any concrete difference. We're just letting people go through the motions, saying, yeah, that's amazing, and moving forward. Instead, I think that we have to be a lot more deliberate. And this applies, again, not just to the people in your team that you're coaching, but also to you yourself, especially if you don't have a coach like myself to help you in your progress, in your path. Because when we think about it, skill stacking is about thinking deliberately, what are the basics that I need to have in order to move on? And sometimes I see companies that actually sit down and think a bit about their different engineering levels, and they might actually have given it enough thought. Sometimes not. But whatever the case, even if they have these ready, often they are not making this connection between those skills that we know should be the basics, the foundation for moving on to the next level, and actually what people are going through in their coaching, in their one-on-one conversations. So what you ought to be doing is to think a bit about, what do I expect to see? What's a good, natural journey I want to have my people go through? And it's not going to be the same path for everyone, because some people can come with different experiences, be naturally more inclined and better at specific skills. So it's not as if everyone has to tick the same boxes. If you've ever done Duolingo, it's not like everyone has to go through the same path, but everyone should have the same foundations, or at least similar foundations, solid enough when they're moving on to the next level. You might have had to help them with some of the foundation, and maybe they already have had it, but they need to have that in common before moving on. So for example, in your team, if people are talking to you about wanting to become managers, that's fine, but let's first talk about whether they are accountable enough by themselves. Do they have enough ownership for the things that they are doing in order to be able to take ownership for the work of several people? The same also applies to how they communicate. If they cannot give you feedback as their manager about how they're doing and share in a verbose and understandable way what's happening, what's the progress, whether they have any issues, how can you expect them to actually do that with a bunch of different engineers that they are going to be in charge of? So a healthy stacking of skills here is about ensuring that they can do the basics for them before even considering bringing in other people under them and letting them be in charge of that. Another example is when I work with people and they talk about, the IC like lateral progress and they want to become architects or whatever. I say, okay, that's amazing. But this is not just about, how not most, but a lot of engineers see it. It's like they keep stacking like one on top of the other, just very, very technical skills when they want to become architects or when they view their architect role. So it's like, okay, I understand whatever, Python, Java, whatever, and we're going to just stacking more and more bricks on top of that understanding. We're like, hey, can't you see that this is wobbly as heck because, one little push is going to be falling over. What you have to do if you want to become an architect is not just be deep, vertical in one area, but you have to also gain some understanding about the surroundings. So it's not just enough to be very good about Java. You have to understand the architecture as a whole. You have to understand how things are operating when it comes to our communication with the database, with our counterparts in the other parts of the company that might be using different infrastructures and different systems. You have to be able to communicate effectively with people because as an architect, it's not just you just going to be writing some documents and people will magically do everything. You'll have to learn how to communicate, how to share ideas, how to get people engaged in a big change you want to do, how to help people learn new things, right? That's sort of that. So even if they might have started with that column of bricks that's amazing, we're going to have to be adding some things on the sides to ensure that we're building something that's a lot more stable and becomes a healthy foundation for them moving forward. This is your role. And I think that having this mental model can really help you when you're looking at someone and thinking about and evaluating their progress and thinking about what they're going to be, ought to be doing in the future. Thinking about it like that can really help clear up what should be the next stage or very easily to spot when we're moving up too fast in a way that doesn't really make sense. That's it for this episode. As always, thank you for joining me. If you haven't yet, do check out my newsletter. The link is in the show notes where you're going to get every week this podcast, an article, a video, and some extra goodies. If you have any questions or comments, my email is also in the show notes, and I'd be happy to hear from you. And one last quick thing. If you're hearing this when it's coming out, early April, you can still sign up for Unplug with Aviv and join our next live session, which is about from firefighting to leading. Especially if you constantly feel overwhelmed, this is going to be a great first session for you to join and have a personal upgrade. And of course, by doing so, you'll get access to the entire back catalog. So the link for that as well is going to be in the show notes, and I'll see you here next week. Ciao.